Now we have gotten the microphone figured out. Uh, the next topic is Russian girls slash women. There's a lot to talk about because one is from the fairy tales books that I read as a kid and the history that I've been studying, and I have had the pleasure of personally knowing a few. Um, so, where do I begin? In the history book, in the fairy tales books, and let me remind you that these books were published in Moscow, and they were in Marathi. So it's very interesting that a book is published in Marathi text. I'm not saying that the book was published in Moscow in Russian or English and then someone else, like a local publisher, translated it to Marathi. It was a Marathi book published in Moscow, and there are so many of them that I had as a kid. And they painted, so the fairy tales were different. Of course, it was folk tales, and it didn't paint a picture of what the Russian Soviet life was at the time. But then there was this Denis Chagoshti, or Adventures of Denis. It was really interesting because his mother went to work and she was involved in all these important decisions. And that is, I would say, where I began to learn about Russian culture in general, but women not particularly. Then I think that the first woman that I would talk about in Russian women who was monumental. She's probably the most important woman most people have not heard of, and she is Alexandra Kolontai. Kolontai. I have to see the Russian spelling of that name because I have been reading in English on Wikipedia and other places on the internet. So she was, the most important feminist in the who has had like political power. She was later on in her life an ambassador of the Soviet Union to other republics like Sweden, etc. But that's not the important part. The important part is that she was the one who changed the world in such a huge way, because you know what the Russian Revolution did? It was the first state to grant suffrage to women all over the world. Now, of course, the feminist movement was growing everywhere simultaneously in the world after the Industrial Revolution. Russian Revolution was the first crack where women got their rights, and it was not just voting rights. That's the most important part. She had founded this committee for, it was a department for women. It was called Zhenotdel, it's Russian pronunciations. Zhenshina means a woman in Russian, and so it was a department for women. And it was very important because what the Russian Revolution did was not just giving voting rights to women, they also gave them paid maternity leaves. It was the first country in the world to give paid maternity leaves, abortion rights, amazing. Then marital rape was made illegal in 1922. We are living in 2024 India. It's been 102 years since that, and we still don't have that in India. So the Bolsheviks and Alexandra Kolontai and her fellow feminists in the Bolshevik ranks, they sought to change women's status and bring it equal to men. And the only way that they saw how it would happen, and of course in Marxist doctrine, it is by elevating them financially. So guaranteed employment, guaranteed education, guaranteed housing, guaranteed health care. Now these are the things that take up a lot of money for most people. Now here, what you have is you get a house because you are, a human being, a citizen of this state. You get a house, you get education, all to all levels until the, university level. And you have guaranteed employment once you graduate, and you have guaranteed housing. You just go and, you go to the office and they say, oh, these are the houses available. Which one do you like? You pick it and they give you the flat. Now, of course, it took a while until they could construct so many. Initially, they had to be cramped in, like more people had to live shared together, like so many of our parents have had to do. So, but that was the base of women's liberation in the USSR. It was financial, mostly to give her the independent freedom of being a person of her own and not to be tied to her husband's identity. They gave the new families the right to choose their own name. So you didn't have to take your husband's name. You could invent a new name and take it. She was monumental in all of those decisions. And she was very prominent. She was not just, like a feminist side, she was also very prominent revolutionary. And we hear about Betty Friedan and Virginia Woolf, etc., but her name usually does not come up in regular discussions that you hear about feminism. Of course, those who study feminism, they are taught Marxist feminism, liberal feminism, radical feminism, all these things, and of course, they would obviously know her name. In the other revolutionary, Bolshevik revolutionary that I would talk about is Nadezhda Krupskaya. She was the commissar of the education department in the USSR. And so she was the one who was in charge of education in the Soviet Union. I just said the same thing in a probably in a different voice, as in active, passive. She used to teach workers before the revolution, like thousands of them, adults mainly, not just kids. And we have that problem in India that a lot of adults cannot read. And she was the person behind building so many libraries in the USSR, and she was also a Marxist theorist. People study her writings. Also, she was the wife of Comrade Lenin, but that's not very important. After that, I think I would talk about Lyudmila Pavlyuchenkova. Now, this is a name that a lot of people might have heard. I mean, you must have seen a meme, or not a meme, but I mean, meme doesn't have to be funny. That's a misconception. So you must have seen an image on the internet talking about Lady Death. This woman, she was like 25 when she joined the Red Army, when they had the Germans had invaded the Soviet Union, and initially they said, "Oh, you be a nurse," but she said, "No, I want to be a sniper." She became a sniper. And she has 309 confirmed Nazi kills. I mean, Nazi collaborating / Nazi kills. And that puts her in the top 5 snipers of all time. That is crazy. And, I mean, the nickname is Lady Death because it was insane. They were afraid of her. 309 kills. And she was asked, how does it feel when, you're killing a man? And she replied, "I wouldn't know. I have only ever killed fascists." I think the next one would be Valentina Tereshkova. She was one of the very first few people in space. She went abroad, space like aboard a rocket, not abroad, aboard a rocket. She was up there for 3 days. Okay, and she was like, she's still the only woman, like she was the only one in that space, what would you call it, ship? It's not a ship. It was a woman only mission, and that has been the only one so far. So not only was she the only person, like the first woman in space, she still holds the record of a woman only flight in space. And she was still the youngest woman to ever go to space until like last year. And she's still alive, by the way. I didn't know that until like a few months ago. It's very interesting. These are the monumental women that come to my mind when I think about Russian women in general. But I have personally had the pleasure of knowing a few Russian women in person. And the first one, well, she was Ukrainian. She's an astronomer, and she would go down to Chile. And she would take all these readings, like staying up, readings as in observations, astronomy basically. So she would take the astrophotographs and so on. And it's an inspiring thing to see, to go down to Chile alone, live in a desert. She used to send me these pictures of these animals down there, and take all these astrophotographs. And after that, I would say that I lived in Moscow for a while. For a couple of months, I was working on my master's thesis at the Moscow State University. And the team that I was working in only had only one professor who was male, and the rest of the team, there were like 9 or 10. They were all women. And it was, an institute in physics, like astrophysics, astronomy, and it's very, very rare to see a female-dominated team anywhere in India. I have not seen it. If you know, please let me know. It's very rare to see that. So many women in a team, in a physics-related field, And it was there I met so many women scientists, and I worked with them. The one other I would talk about was a girl named Christina in the hostel that I lived. Now she was so interesting. I mean, she was probably like 19, 20. She was working on her undergraduate degree, and she was also working as a receptionist somewhere. Now the first thing that caught my attention was this girl could speak English. Now that's very rare in Russia. If you ask them if do you speak English, Gavarye vi po-angliski. My Russian is getting so bad. Gavarye. Ty gavarish po-angliski. That is the informal. And they say 50-50, and when you really talk to them, it's more like 90-10. They don't really. But she could speak English very well. And that was rare to see because she was not from Moscow. She was not from the capital. She was from a faraway town. And I was impressed by that she had spent so much time studying English when all of her peers had not. But that was not the only part. She was working as a receptionist part-time and studying at a university to get her degree, and also studying English and Chinese. She was studying Chinese, Mandarin. And I saw a lot of people in Russia studying Mandarin, but Mandarin is such a hard language to learn. Not just because it is like not Indo-Aryan, it's like totally disconnected Sino-Asiatic language, and they have the difficult part is that they don't have an alphabet. They don't have an abugida. You have to memorize thousands of characters, and that's not just the most difficult part. It's a tonal language, so the way you say things changes the meaning. So there's the word, I think, May, and it's like ghost with May. I don't even know the tones, I can't pronounce them, and then it's something else entirely when you say it differently. And she was studying that, and what she would do, she would come home from work or college, and then she would put on her sweatpants, and she would put them up really high. Then she would get to her meal prep. She would like prepare meals for like 3-4 days or a week, and then she would store them away in the fridge. Like we had a common fridge, and then she would start studying immediately. That was so inspiring to see. I admired her so much. I mean, I could look at her and I knew that this girl is gonna go places. And I even wrote that on a chat, like, this is amazing, or I wouldn't say I'm very proud of it. It was some positive message, and I don't know why I wrote it on a chat. I could have just told her face to face, but I wrote that on the chat and I passed it along, and she kept it in her book. I wish she still has it. I mean, it's a silly thought. Another one that I met at the Moscow State University, Anya. She was she had just studied biotech, BTech plus MTech from, I think it was like a dual degree also, I'm not very sure, from Moscow State University. And she had been working as a like she had worked a while previously as a COVID test, like she would jab people in their noses for the job, and at the moment she was working as a biotech engineer, and she was applying for PhDs, and she probably is doing one right now. But she was very interesting because she was involved in the feminist circle, and you might know that there is quite an feminist movement in Russia, which is like a counterculture movement in Russia, and I got to experience all of that. And there were very interesting books in her like that she was reading, and she gave me an idea about the Russian perspective, like about Russian life and the contemporary society, etc., from a very native and educated view. Because if you go out on a street and you ask a person about the country, all they can, I mean, if person picked at random, the chances are that they would give the status quo answer about how the country is going, because they haven't really had the time to think and process things. But you really have to see through the media, see through the status quo and the narrative to see what really is happening. So yeah, that's what she offered me. And I think one of the phrases that she told me that the Russians say is that we sold the union for jeans and pizza. And it's quite profoundly sad statement. And I won't go into the details of what it means to sell your country or the union of countries for jeans and pizza. I mean, I'm itching to go into the whole topic of the stagnation and what they thought what capitalism, liberal markets would deliver, and what really happened, and how they bounced back. And I mean, even now Russia is not a superpower, and I mean, back then it was a collection of 15 states, but even then it's not at the same place what it used to be. It was a tremendous loss for humanity. But I digress. So I think, yeah, that is what I have to say on the topic of Russian women slash girls slash women, as it's written here. Now we'll move on to the next one.